container return scheme, but actually a CRS shifts the cost of these, our beverage containers from ratepayers and renters, who are also ratepayers, back, more fairly and more equitably to the producers and the consumers.
All right. Hey, that music is telling me my time is up. That's really flown by, hasn't it? Thank you, Anna.
Yeah.
Anna Dean. Peter. Thank you, Peter. Peter Field.
Yeah, good morning.
Yeah. Once I got to know what kind of roughly time of day it was, I had a lot of fun. Back tomorrow.
Well done.
Thanks a lot.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, Auckland's Harbour Bridge at the mercy of dodgy weather, lane closures and speed restrictions, and wind threatening to shut it altogether. Safety first or scaremongering? Auckland Transport is live, so is the business group that reckons it's productivity that is blowing in the wind. Speaking of weather, can you remember the last fine day? Well, NIWA's here to tell you when to expect the next one. The government eyes shorter wait times for cataract surgery will have reaction. Tipsy Tory, the Wellington Mayor, defends her drink, dine and dash. And brass monkeys welcome the Daily Dippers taking the plunge regardless of the temperature. I know. You can watch us live on the RNZ website, Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Ahi Marie, good afternoon. I'm Evie Ashton. The first step towards removing the postcode lottery for public hospital surgery has been announced. From today, people with mildly reduced vision will have earlier access to cataract operations as the government moves to standardise eligibility for them. Health Minister Aisha Verrall says extra funding for the new patients can be used in two ways.
Firstly, outsourcing to the private sector where there's capacity there, and secondly, an approach called insourcing, which is where we might pay our public staff to do extra operating lists if they're willing on a Saturday to get through that sort of hump of work that we have to do at the very beginning when the threshold criteria changes.
Aisha Verrall says just under 8,000 people are currently on the cataract surgery waitlist, and about 3,500 of them will meet the new threshold. The government has boosted its pay equity offer for Te Whatu Ora nurses by $1.5 billion in an effort to end a long-running dispute. More than 30,000 nurses will soon vote on the package negotiated by Te Whatu Ora and unions. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says it will be the largest settlement in New Zealand's history if accepted.
I'm incredibly proud of the $4 billion commitment we've made to address pay inequity in this largely female workforce who have campaigned for years to have these issues addressed.
The deal puts senior nurses on an annual salary of between $106,000 and $153,000, with registered nurses somewhere between $70,000 and $100,000. Nurses would also get a $15,000 lump sum on top of $10,000 already paid to settle back pay litigation. A teacher who had a sexual relationship with a 16-year-old student at a private Christchurch girls' school has been struck off. The teacher's disciplinary tribunal found that Taurapa, formerly known as Connor Taurapa Matthews, showered the Rangirudu student with attention and affection for almost a year. Jean Edwards reports.
Taurapa was teaching te reo Māori at the school when he bought the girl a 16th birthday present in 2018, sent a romantic poem and pursued her through intimate phone messages. The tribunal found this quickly evolved into a highly inappropriate and sexualised relationship. Taurapa also sent inappropriate messages to another 16-year-old girl. The tribunal ordered the cancellation of his teacher's registration for serious misconduct.
A Wellington City councillor says Mayor Tory Whānau's behaviour is making the whole council look bad. Ms Whānau admits to being tipsy when she walked out of a restaurant without paying on Friday, but denies asking a waiter during the evening if he knew who she was. Ray Chung says the council already suffers from a low public approval rating.
I think the public will think worse of us than even what they do now. It isn't good, and it destroys a lot of the hard work that I think that some of the people have been doing.
Ray Chung says Tory Whānau needs to do more to make things right. And an employer advocacy group says Waka Kotahi is fairmongering by closing Auckland Harbour Bridge lanes for insufficient reasons. The Transport Agency has closed and reopened lanes multiple times throughout the day because of strong wind, and bridge traffic is on red alert until 9 tonight. A spokesperson for the Employers and Manufacturers Association, Alan McDonald, says it's another day of productivity lost for the city's economy. He says it's causing employees to leave work early or not come in at all.
We appreciate that the weather's getting, there's more extreme weather around, and we can understand the need to close it in extremes. But, I'm sitting here looking at basically a gentle Wellington zephyr going past the window, and we're talking about closing the Harbour Bridge.
The EMA is asking Waka Kotahi to review its closure policies. To sport now, and Auckland's Shane van Gisbergen has stunned the motor racing world by winning his debut NASCAR race. His victory in the competition's first ever street circuit race in Chicago makes him the first NASCAR driver in 60 years to win on debut. The three-time Australian Supercars champion had to cope with rain delays, which reduced the race from 100 laps to 78.
Shane van Gisbergen has been perfect. He has navigated the streets of Chicago to perfection. He comes to the checkered flag. He's won the very first street race in NASCAR.
That's excellent. Thank you, guys.
The remaining 3 Ashes cricket tests are set for a combustible atmosphere now that Australia have taken a 2-0 lead in the series. They won by 43 runs on the final day at Lord's, but England were left stunned when Johnny Barstow was controversially stumped by wicket-keeper Alex Carey. England coach and former Black Cap skipper Brendan McCullum concedes the relationship between the two teams is not at its best.
Well, I can't imagine we'll be having a beer anytime soon, if that's what you're asking. I think from our point of view, we've got 3 test matches to try and land some blows and try and win the Ashes, and that's where our focus will be.
And Wimbledon gets underway tonight with men's defending champ Novak Djokovic and women's top seed Iga Swiatek both in action. Last year's men's runner-up Nick Kyrgios has withdrawn with a wrist injury. That's the news.
The south is blanketed in snow.
Has between about 15 to 20 centimetres of snow around that Dunedin, south of Targo.
While Auckland struggles with the breeze.
In Auckland, some lanes on the Harbour Bridge may close this morning due to strong winds.
But it's all clear in Wellington.
The wind did disappear on Wellington and it's been very eerie for many Wellingtonians.
Through all seasons, Morning Report weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, here's the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. From Northland to Manawatu, also Coromandel Peninsula and the Central High Country. Showers more frequent in the west, some heavy with thunderstorms possible there today. Showers becoming isolated tomorrow, gale west to southwesterlies. Bay of Plenty and from Gisborne to Waidudapa. A few showers clearing this evening, fine tomorrow. Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast and Wellington, fine apart from a few showers in Wellington this afternoon. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, a few showers clearing this afternoon and evening. Gale southwesterlies in exposed places. Bulla and Westland, showers north of Ross, with snow to about 800 metres clearing this afternoon but returning tomorrow morning. In the south, cloudy periods. Otago, Southland and Fiordland. Showers, some heavy and falling as snow to 1,000 metres, becoming isolated tomorrow afternoon. Gale southwesterlies in exposed places. And for Rekohu, Chatham Islands, showers, possibly heavy with thunderstorms tomorrow afternoon. The time is 7 minutes past 5. I will have traffic news and headlines for you at about 20 past 5.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Tonight, Auckland commuters on edge. The Harbour Bridge could close this evening with heavy winds forecast to reach red alert levels. Gusts of 90 kilometres and above can mean a complete shutdown of the crossing for safety reasons. It's been nudging 85 k's at times. The wind is expected to be at its worst between now and 9 o'clock this evening. Earlier in the day, dodgy weather saw several lanes shut down and the speed limit reduced to 50 kilometres. Meanwhile, one business advocacy group reckons it's productivity that's blowing in the wind, with workers scared into staying home for fear they'll be trapped by a bridge closure and freight in jeopardy. Well, joining us now is Auckland Transport Manager of Metro Optimisation, Richard Harrison. Kia ora, Richard.
Kia ora, Lisa.
How are things tracking on the bridge right now?
Well, we're waiting to see what's happening. At the moment, things are flowing nicely along Fanshawe Street outside of our office. We did have some delays to bus services through the day, as you said, with lanes being closed and speed restrictions in place. So we're just waiting to see what will happen.
How close to those cut-off gusts are we getting at the moment?
We are getting up there, and it's going to get worse over the next couple of hours, we're hearing.
So is it your feeling that at some point the bridge will close this evening, given the forecast?
Yeah, I think that's a very real possibility. We've seen it happen before with this kind of forecast. Certainly the winds have been up and down through the day and they've been gusting quite strongly around here.
How much warning do you get from Waka Kotahi if that's going to happen?
They have to make a decision on the spot. So if the wind does gust, then they will make the decision immediately. It's a safety issue, and we respect that. But they're great at giving us advance warning that this might happen, so we can plan around it if possible.
Richard, you may be aware of the criticism from the Employers and Manufacturers Association that they say it's nigh on scaremongering and that people have been convinced to stay at home. There's a loss of productivity and, you're too risk averse. What do you think?
Well, look, our role is to keep people moving around the city, so I appreciate that. We want to be bringing people in and out of the city to work and to universities and schools and going to leisure. But we do respect there are some very real safety concerns here. It's not that long since there was an accident on the bridge that actually damaged the bridge's infrastructure. So we are happy to be guided by Waka Kotahi on when it is safe to use the bridge.
Are all vehicles able to go over the bridge at the moment, or what's the advice there?
At the moment, we've got both single and double-decker buses travelling over the bridge, yes.
So what happens to public transport if there is a bridge closure this evening?
If there's a closure, we initially stand down our bus services where they are, either side of the bridge, for up to 30 minutes, and we wait for clearance to go again. The reason we do that is we've seen in the past that often these gusts are transitory and they pass quite quickly and we can get things moving again. If we were to divert services around the western route, around State Highway 16, then we end up, that's a long journey, we end up with the buses out of position and it takes us a lot longer to recover. So we have got those plans in place as contingency place if there are sustained high winds, but our preference is to stand down for a period of time and then we can recover a lot faster.
So, Richard, half an hour stand down. If the situation remains the same, then you do what? What's plan B?
Yeah, then we start diverting around the Western Ring route. We have in the past taken people to ferry services and used those, although you'll appreciate if there are high winds in the harbour, it's highly likely ferry services would be impacted too.
And how are people supposed to find out this stuff? You know, if you are using different bus routes, where do they know what bus stop to go to, all that kind of stuff? Yeah,
the best place is to get the information from our app. Large number of people have downloaded the app. We've got hundreds of thousands of users, and a lot of people have signed up for notifications in that. So if you have saved your favourite stops that are linked to a route that goes over the Harbour Bridge, then we'll be able to post messages out to you. We also obviously use the media as we are now. That's a great way to reach a lot of customers, and we do have our own social media comms.
Richard, the other issue at the moment for Aucklanders is the rail disruption today, right? Which is a Kiwi Rail issue.
Yeah.
Why weren't the repairs done overnight? Because I noticed they put out a press release. You put out a press release warning that there could be disruption today and that there's going to be overnight repairs. Why weren't they done last night?
Yeah, it's disappointing. The issue actually was that they weren't able to complete the overnight work in time for the start of service today. And so Kiwi Rail have been working on that through today, and they can keep going into this evening if they need to. The plan is that we will get the line back for the start of service tomorrow.
Appreciate your time, Richard. That's Richard Harrison from Auckland Transport. Now, one business group is fuming about the bridge warnings. Alan McDonald is Head of Advocacy, Strategy and Finance for the Employers and Manufacturers Association and joins us now. What's the problem, Alan?
Well, I think fuming might be overstating it, Lisa, and we're not the only business organisation that's raised this issue. It's just highly frustrating. How are you supposed to plan your working day when half your workforce don't turn up or decide not to come in because they've been warned that the bridge might close? And then you get warnings that say, well, look, we might close it between 12 and 9 p.m. So the other half of your workforce or a part of your workforce thinks, I better go home so I can get home tonight. It's happening with increasing frequency and just the lack of clarity around it. And we know that Waka Kotahi's lowered its risk threshold for closing the bridge, and I think they really need to revisit that.
So you reckon 90k gusts is too conservative to close the bridge?
Well, it used to be much higher than that, and I think as your previous speaker just said, they're still running buses and things across the bridge, and they're not that worried about it. We did have one serious accident in 70 years of bridge operation a couple of years back, and it just seems we've gone overcautious since then, and it just is closing with just too much frequency, I think, and you can't plan for it.
So if not 90k's, where would you set the benchmark for a red alert and a bridge closure?
I just think they need to rethink their thresholds. They were higher in the past. Why can't we go?
Though, Alan? What would you?
Well, what they were previously when we didn't have to. It seems like at the moment.
Which was?
I think it was 120. I'm not 100% certain on that, Lisa. But it just seems at the moment we accept there are extreme weather events and it does need to be closed. But has the threshold come back too far? And that's what we're saying. Why don't you have a good look at that and reassess your risk threshold, because it's too often.
It's rock and hard place though, isn't it, Alan? Because if you get a truck that slams into a part of the bridge that is essential and damages the structure, as did happen, then potentially you're looking at days of closures and delays of certain lanes.
It happened once in 70 years, so you need to look at that threshold, at risk profile and risk analysis. And it's just as well, frankly, that the Dome Valley's open as well now, isn't it? Because the disruption to freight coming through as well it's a massive disruption. And as I say, it just seems to be happening too often. Are the thresholds too low? And that's what we're asking. Revisit the thresholds, reassess it, and have a good look at it.
So what do you reckon happened to productivity today? Any idea of how many people stayed home? And aren't they working at home anyway?
Well, are they? I mean, we've got enough disruptions in the workplace at the moment. We're still recovering from the tail end of COVID. You've got the whole work from home thing. The central city hasn't recovered yet, and so people streaming home in the afternoons or not coming in the mornings, that affects all that. We've had meetings cancelled here and so on. It's just another unnecessary, too often a disruption. There are some that are necessary. We're just asking the question, is it really necessary to shut them as often as they are?
Alan, are you hearing from your members that when people have work at home days, they're not actually working?
There's a little bit of that going on, yes, I think, but we're also hearing a lot from our members who are suffering extreme frustration with the number of closures of the bridge. And
what is that doing to their bottom line?
Well, it will be having an impact on their productivity. It will be having an impact on their planning. I'm sure if you talk to Viv at Heart of the City, she'll be going, the central city's emptied out again. We haven't got that foot traffic. We haven't got those people around because they've gone home. So there's all of that knock-on effect. There might be critical cargoes coming down from Northland that are time sensitive to get to export flights out of Auckland Airport that may miss that because of delays getting across the Harbour Bridge, and that has huge impact on their bottom lines when those cargoes miss those time sensitive flights.
What about the warnings? They started the warnings about 24 hours ago.
Yeah, and I think they just really need to be careful how they manage that, because people are hypersensitive at the moment to wind warnings, weather warnings. We've had some pretty significant events. So just maybe that mindset, we need to be a bit more careful about when are we going to put those warnings out, or what's the timing around that? Because, a window that says between midday and 9 p.m, that's basically the whole working day, and then also closing it between 4 and 7 this morning, or reducing the lane, should I say. Again, these broad time frames, it takes out a whole working day.
Alan, are you going to ask for a meeting with Waka Kotahi, or have you expressed your concerns officially to them?
Not officially, but I'm sure we can pick up the phone and have a conversation. And again, it's not just us that are saying this. There's been other business organisations that are feeling the same level of frustration.
Appreciate your time tonight. That's Alan McDonald, who's from the Employers and Manufacturers Association there. Interested in your thoughts? Do get in touch, 2101 on text, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Did you stay home because of potential closure to the bridge? What do you make of it? 17 minutes after 5, Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The government has begun its efforts to scrap the so-called postcode lottery for surgeries, beginning with cataract operations. New nationwide standards are being rolled out to determine who is eligible, clearing the way for thousands of surgeries over the next 18 months. Here's our political reporter, Katie Scotcher.
Cataract surgery can be life-changing, but the Health Minister, Aisha Verrall, says the postcode lottery has denied many access to it. For decades, the former DHBs used a point system with wildly different thresholds depending on where a person lived.
A score of 46 represents mildly reduced vision. A score of 61 represents poor vision and means a person can no longer legally drive. In Auckland and Waitemata, for example, you become eligible for a cataract operation at a score of 46. But in Canterbury and the Southern District, you need a score of 61.
But the threshold will now be standardised across the whole country, meaning patients with mildly reduced vision will have much earlier access. 3,500 people will immediately become eligible for the surgery because of the change. Those operations will happen over the next 18 months.
Te Whatu Ora's hospital and specialist teams will work with those who refer to surgical services to identify who will be eligible for surgery under the new scores as they are progressively rolled out, and will ensure they have timely access to the procedure.
The new national standard comes as the health sector faces intense pressures, workforce shortages, long wait lists and winter illness. Dr Verrall explains how the government plans to ensure hospitals aren't overwhelmed with the increase in demand.
The main thing we will do is prioritise additional funding to those areas where that catch-up is required. That can be used for one of two things. Firstly, outsourcing to the private sector where there's capacity there, and secondly, an approach called insourcing, which is where we might pay our public staff to do extra operating lists if they're willing on a Saturday to get through that sort of hump of work that we have to do at the very beginning.
New Zealand Association of Optometrists President Callum Milburn is pleased to see the change.
It's something we've been asking for a long time.
The government is looking to roll out standardised nationwide thresholds for all elective surgeries. The Health Minister has asked for advice on which procedure should come next.
And that was Katie Scotcher reporting 20 past 5, and you were Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. You can get in touch about Auckland Harbour Bridge. And there's been lane closures and speed reductions during the day. Are we too cautious when it comes to the bridge? Waka Kotahi calls it when they think it's too dangerous to cross over. Some business organisations think they're a bit trigger happy with closing it. Let us know what you think. Also on cataract operations, are you in the queue and how long have you been waiting? 2101 on text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time for the headlines now. Anea Iwi mina pita kōrero.
Auckland commuters are on standby as high winds threaten to force the closure of the Harbour Bridge tonight. It's under a red alert until 9 o'clock, with gusts of between 90 and 110 kilometres an hour forecast. Auckland Transport Manager of Metro Optimisation, Richard Harrison, told Checkpoint closure is a very real possibility. The government says another 3,500 people will qualify for cataract surgery over the next 18 months because of eligibility reforms announced today. A new national threshold is replacing the old regional system, which had created a so-called postcode lottery. More than 30,000 nurses are to vote on a new pay package negotiated by Te Whatu Ora and unions, into which the government has put another $1.5 billion. It would give senior nurses an annual salary of between $106,000 and $153,000, while registered nurses would earn between $70,000 and $100,000. Efforts to hold Russia legally accountable for the war in Ukraine will take a step forward later when a special tribunal gets underway in The Hague. The body, which is backed by the European Union, the United States and Ukraine, has been set up specifically to deal with the crime of aggression. And in Mexico, it's too red hot for the chili peppers. A drought is hitting growers, with red jalapenos hit the hardest. It's led to sureta sauce selling online for up to 25 times its normal price. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic. All lanes are currently open on the Harbour Bridge in Auckland. As you heard earlier on the programme, strong wind gusts may impact again today, with further lane reductions possible. State Highway 25 continues to operate under stop-go management at a slip between Ruamahunga and Waiomu from 7:30 in the morning to 5:30 in the evening until further notice. In the central North Island, State Highway 2 Matawai to Te Karaka is still closed, as is State Highway 50 Te Kokino. And in Wellington, State Highway 1 at Raumati northbound is all lanes open again prior to the Poplar Avenue off-ramp after it closed earlier last hour for a breakdown, so there still might be delays there. Our next traffic news and headlines are at 20 to 6.
Nā mihi eho. New Zealand racing driver Shane van Gisbergen has shown he's quick no matter what he's driving. The three-time Australian Supercars champion has won on NASCAR debut in America today. Behind the wheel of the stock car, the 34-year-old won the first street course race in NASCAR history. Well, joining us now is Felicity Reid. How big a deal is this, Felicity?
Well, we've seen Shane van Gisbergen be dominant in a V8, have some relative success in a rally car, but he's taken to this NASCAR driving quite quickly. He was the fastest in practice, but he actually qualified to start from third from the grid. And today, NASCAR is not necessarily known for the street circuit, right? So these are the people that drive on an oval. That's a lot of left-hand turning. So that's normally what they do, but it wasn't the surface that was disrupted today for these drivers. It was the rain. Torrential rain actually delayed the start of this race. It was supposed to be 100 laps. It got reduced to 78 laps, which is basically to get the racing done while it was still daylight. So it's not kind of the start that you would want maybe on your NASCAR debut, but that didn't really stop Shane van Gisbergen. He was at the front from quite early on. There was a lot of crashes and things that he wasn't involved with, but as well as pit strategy kind of getting messed up as it goes through an event like this where it's raining and where things have been a little bit out of kilter for everybody. So he dropped to 18th, but he actually showed his credentials and drove right the way back through the field to be the winner. So he got the win by taking out a overtime 2-lap victory over Justin Haley. So that makes him the first driver to win his series since Johnny Rutherford did at Daytona in 63. He becomes the 7th driver to win on debut and the 2nd Supercars driver after Marcus Ambrose to actually achieve this. So if you've seen Shane van Gisbergen driving before, maybe in Supercars, you'll know how he celebrated. It was with a burnout. And as we probably heard earlier, plenty of celebration, the woohoo, the burnout. He didn't reserve that. He was doing that on the streets of Chicago today as well.
Okay. Manners are the next thing in question, Felicity. The manners of members of the Marylebone Cricket Club, which is based at Lord's in London. Now, some of them have been suspended after a clash with the Aussie players. Now, this is during the final day of the second Ashes test. Do tell.
Yeah, so Ashes cricket test brings out a lot of emotion in everybody, whether that's the players or the fans. So it's three members who have been suspended after an interaction with Australian players. So it was something that happened on the field that led to this off-field incident. It was England's Johnny Bairstow. He was stumped by Australian wicketkeeper Alex Carey. Alex Carey sort of underarmed the ball knocked over the stumps while Johnny Bairstow had wandered out of his crease, as some cricketers tend to do. Bairstow thought that the over was over, and as it turned out, it wasn't. So he was dismissed as they were chasing quite a hefty total as well. But that instantly led to the crowd booing the Australians. It started up that chant of same old Aussies always cheating. But it was as well as Usman Khawaja and David Warner were going back into the long room. So this long room in cricket is one of these kind of quirks of international cricket where to get from the field of play to the dressing room, you actually have to go through this room where the members are. And you basically, the players and the members are like shoulder to shoulder. It's really close.
You have to run the gauntlet.
Yeah, basically, exactly. And so in running this gauntlet, Khawaja and Warner stopped to address somebody who was, they say, were disrespectful. It was all these kinds of words of what was being said to the players after what had happened on the field. These people, very passionate cricket people, were not happy with what they'd seen on the field and then in turn decided to take it out on the players. There's been footage which shows that security got in between the Australian players and the fans, and as we've said, the MCC has unreservedly apologised for this behaviour. It's not something that they would consider themselves to be. But, you know, Australian cricket captain Pat Cummins says he likes the long room tradition of having to run that gauntlet. But here's his take on what's happened.
I think they were just quite aggressive and abusive towards some of our players. Other than that kind of one time, they were fantastic all week, really welcoming. You know, it's something special about playing at Lords is you feel like you're at a really special place, surrounded by people who just share a love of the game. So, I don't know, I quite like the tradition.
So Australia lead this 5-match series 2-0 and the third test is at Headingley on Thursday. So not long for everyone to get over this.
Thank you, Felicity. Felicity Reid there with sport. If you live in Auckland, you may be struggling to remember the last rain-free day in the city, and it's not just in the north. Plenty of regions are struggling to dry out too. Yes, it is winter, but backyards are bog holes. Many are still mopping up from the year's extreme weather events. And now parents are being tested with a damp start to the school holidays too, depressing much. So is there any silver linings in the epic number of rain clouds? Well, joining us now is NIWA meteorologist Seth Carrier. Hi, Seth.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Is there hope for a rain-free day? Let's start with Auckland. When might we expect it?
Well, things are actually going to start looking better in the short term over the next couple of days. I think tomorrow there could be a couple showers, not as much as there was today. But then by Wednesday and definitely on Thursday, things are looking a lot better. So definitely some dry weather as we go through the middle part of this week.
Is this a weird weather pattern? I mean, people have noted that, you know, you go outside, it's absolutely pouring with rain. It'll be short and sharp and then it'll stop and you think, OK, it's safe to go out again. And then another burst of bad weather. Is there an explanation for that?
Well, I think the situation that we find ourselves in now, it's actually not that unusual for this time of the year. I think, you know, one thing that we have to keep in mind is that the last few years we've been dealing with a La Nina pattern. So that means a lot of subtropical moisture from the north. What we're seeing recently is more westerlies coming off the Tasman Sea. That's not that unusual for the winter time. And what that tends to lead to with that colder air coming in, it brings these short and sharp showers. So it'll rain, be moderate to even briefly heavy for a few minutes, and then it goes away. But it's nothing particularly unusual for this time of year in this particular pattern.
So for Auckland, what has the rainfall been like for this year compared to previous years?
Well, through the first 6 months of the year, extremely wet. In fact, the wettest on record since records began in 1959. At Auckland Airport, we've had over 1,100 millimeters of rain since January 1st. And that's about 220% of normal through the first 6 months of the year. So definitely a very wet first half of the year. That's certainly the truth. People who think that's the case, that is correct.
And what about other regions that we know have taken an absolute hammering? Tairawhiti, for example?
Yeah, so the top and east of the North Island, they've all been extremely wet in the first 6 months of the year. Whitianga in the Coromandel Peninsula has had 184% of its normal rainfall for the first 6 months of the year. The city of Gisborne, 195% of normal, and the city of Napier, 245% of normal. So that's a pretty consistent theme through the top and east of the North Island. Much wetter than normal through the first 6 months of the year.
Yeah, and so for those regions also, what should they expect over the next couple of months of winter?
Well, so I think what we're going to be dealing with is a change in this pattern. Obviously, as I said, the 6 months have been extremely wet, but we're transitioning from what we had, which was a La Nina pattern. As I said before, that's a lot of northerly winds, a lot of moisture from the subtropics. We're transitioning to an El Nino, which is more westerlies or southwesterlies. And so for the North Island, that can actually lead to drier weather, drier than normal. And while we're still in the transition phase as we go through July, I think later in the winter and in the spring, we're probably going to see those drier than normal conditions emerge across the North Island.
Really appreciate you explaining that. Thank you, Seth. That's Seth Carrier, who is a meteorologist with NIWA. It is 28 minutes away from 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It is time for the business news. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Anand Zaki, who joins us live. Anand, residential building consents have fallen again.
Kia ora to you, Lisa. Yes, it's been on a downward trend this year, and it's more of the same, according to the latest data from Stats NZ, who say the number of homes consented is down 11% for the year ended May. So just over 45,000 new homes were consented in that period, taking us back to levels last seen in 2021, and that's compared to the record 51,000 in the year ended May 2022. Townhouses, flats and units, that's fallen for the first time since late 2012. And we saw more retirement village units and apartments being built in that period. In terms of regions, the big two, Auckland and Canterbury, are leading the way with the most consents. Now, some economists were actually expecting stronger numbers in May, but that hasn't happened given the tougher economic conditions. But 45,000 new homes consented is still pretty good when you look at historic levels. And economists say that means there's still a decent pipeline of work. But despite that, some are expecting a downturn within the sector because there are some factors that aren't working in favour of builders, such as house prices. House prices have fallen by about 17% across the country, and construction costs have risen around 9%, and interest rates, of course, are a lot higher as well. So buyers don't want to buy, and developers don't want to bring new projects to the market. So with that in mind, there could be some more pain on the way for the residential construction sector.
But you have some hope and a win for a major honey exporter, eh? So tell us more.
Well, who wouldn't complain about this? We all love honey, don't we? Comvita has signed a long-term deal with one of China's biggest retail chains, Olé. Olé has more than 100 supermarkets across mainland China. And they signed a memorandum of understanding during Prime Minister Chris Hipkins' China trip last week. And analysts say Comvita could earn millions in revenue from this agreement. And they've set out a plan to significantly grow their current business with Olé, which is the biggest premium retailer in China. So quite a big deal for Comvita. And the company's chief executive, David Banfield, told the share market that the agreement also includes a pledge to include a number of environmental, social and governance initiatives, or ESG, that might benefit the ethical investors. And the ESG initiatives mean benefits to not only customers and shareholders, but also bees. They want to save more than 10 million bees every year and also be carbon neutral by 2025.
Anna, should we take a spin around the markets, please?
Yes, the local top 50 index fractionally higher at 11,917. After spending pretty much the whole session in the red, Comvita, as I mentioned earlier, they were up 4.5% after the China deal. And the Kiwi dollar is trading at 61.6 US cents and 92.25 Australian ahead of tomorrow's interest rate decision by the Reserve Bank of Australia. Likely to be a close call. Economists are pretty evenly divided on whether it'll be a 25 basis point hike or a pause in rate hikes. So a big day across the Tasman tomorrow.
Thank you, Anand. Ka kite, that's Anand Zaki with Business News there. A lot of feedback coming in about Auckland Harbour Bridge and when to close and when not to close. Bob from Glendean's got in touch. Bridge closures are a ruse to convince us that we need an expensive tunnel. Overseas, says Bob, there are just warnings for high-sided vehicles and motorcycles. Murray has been in touch to say Alan McDonald from the EMA should remember when the truck blew over and caused bridge lanes to be closed for weeks. I'd leave transport experts to make closure decisions. Another listener says the bridge isn't the only way to the shore. Stop moaning. Safety before profits, says another listener. And Nikki's got in touch to say, given we haven't got a choice since Auckland ferries use every excuse to cancel services, just shows how decades of dire planning and overspending on everything other than infrastructure has left Auckland in this state. Let's have one cheery-ish one before we move on. From someone who lives in Wellington, skiting much. Please give a moment to consider the beautiful weather in Wellington that it has had over the past few months. June was a record breaker for a lack of wind, and sunny and beautiful even this morning. Not so fine now, but it truly has been beautiful. Lucky you. And speaking of Wellington, Wellington's mayor says she is embarrassed she walked out of a restaurant without paying, but denies trying to get special treatment. Tori Whānau is accused by the restaurant staff of asking them, "Do you know who I am?" The mayor and a friend were at the Old Quarter in Wellington's CBD on Friday night, and she acknowledges she was tipsy. Hamish Cardwell has more.
A night out with a friend has landed Wellington's mayor Tori Whānau in hot water. Staff at the restaurant say when the pair arrived, they seemed intoxicated, and they considered whether to sell them a bottle of wine, but did so as they ordered food. Tori Whānau declined to speak to RNZ, but told News Talk ZB during her regular interview this morning, leaving without paying was an honest mistake.
Look, I had a private dinner with a friend of mine. We had some food, we had some wines, and yes, miscommunication, we thought the other person had paid the bill. Mortified, absolutely embarrassed the next morning to realise we hadn't, so she paid it immediately.
Old Quarter manager Shay Lomas says Whānau's waiter told him at one point during the evening, she asked, "Do you know who I am?"
The servant recognised it but wasn't entirely sure, so he's just kind of like, "Oh, no, I'm not too sure who you are." And she's just like, "Oh, I'm the mayor of Wellington," blah, blah, blah. Just kept saying stuff like that.
That's just something I wouldn't say, so I deny saying that.
Despite her denials, the waiter is adamant about what she said and that a patron heard it too. The mayor has made no secret she enjoys a night out, as she told RNZ's Anna Thomas the day after being elected in October.
I won't lie, many wines were had, and it was a bit of a late one, which is why I'm a bit croaky this morning.
The new mayor was asked what she did for fun.
What do I do for fun? Oh, I love my wine. I love a glass of wine.
Tori Whānau told News Talk ZB she has no regrets about the events of Friday night, but says she needs to adjust to being in the public eye.
This is just the reality of public figures, especially politicians. But look, I'm keen to move past this. I'm keen to keep supporting our hospitality industry.
Her friend and council colleague Rebecca Matthews says it's all being blown out of proportion.
If we expect people to behave completely perfectly all of the time, we wouldn't have a mayor of Wellington because none of us is complete saints.
Rebecca Matthews worries people are being held to an unfair standard of behaviour, which could put people off getting into politics. However, fellow councillor Ray Chung says the council already has a low public approval rating, and Whānau's behaviour makes them all look bad.
I think the public will think worse of us than even what they do now. It isn't good, and it destroys a lot of the hard work that I think that some of the people have been doing.
Ray Chung says Tori Whānau needs to do more to make things right. On the streets of Wellington, there was both compassion and criticism for the mayor.
I feel like it's just a little insensitive.
It could reflect negatively on her.
If this is like how the mayor is all the time, then it's like, okay, maybe we should be a little bit worried.
No, I imagine that she's probably embarrassed or mortified now, and she might be a little bit more careful. I'm quite empathetic toward her, really.
Everyone might have a moment like that in their life, so I don't know if we should really be focusing on this.
If the rest of Wellington can go out and have a few drinks and what have you, then why can't she?
Local government New Zealand says its advice to mayors and councillors does not cover public behaviour. Mayor Whānau says she's focusing on working towards delivering positive outcomes for the city.
Well, thoughts and feelings on that one? 2101 on text. It is 20 minutes away from 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program. The text again, 2101. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Email address, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go to the headlines now with Evie. Ko Evie anō tēnei.
Kia ora, Lisa. A business group is asking Waka Kotahi to look again at its threshold for closing Auckland's Harbour Bridge in high winds, with another possible shutdown looming this evening. Alan McDonald of the Employers and Manufacturers Association told Checkpoint the bridge was being closed with increasing frequency. He said it was highly frustrating for companies whose staff were warned off coming in. Health Minister Aisha Verrall says doctors will be asked to work extra hours to treat an influx of cataract patients. A standardised national threshold for eligibility will see about 3,500 more surgeries over the next 18 months. Wellington Mayor Tory Whanau has denied trying to get special treatment in a city restaurant on Friday night, but admits to being tipsy. Ms Whanau says walking out without paying was an honest mistake and corrected the next morning, but she insists any other accusations about her conduct are false. The Productivity Commission says workers should be encouraged to work fewer hours, not more, in the drive for real productivity gains. Its new report, published today, highlights little improvement in New Zealand's overall trend of declining economic productivity. And New Zealand Food Safety warns buying cooked food online can be risky because some vendors are selling from unregistered kitchens. New Zealand Food Safety Acting Deputy Director General Jenny Bishop says there have been cases of people getting ill after buying from unregistered providers. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, all lanes on Auckland's Harbour Bridge are currently open. State Highway 25 is now closed for the day between Ruamahunga and Waiomu, opening again tomorrow morning at 7:30. In the central North Island, State Highway 2, Matawai to Te Karaka is closed, as is State Highway 50, Te Kokino, because of a washout there. In Wellington, due to unforeseen circumstances, a northbound road closure will now be in place on State Highway 1 at Glenside, north of Westchester Drive overbridge, from 9 p.m. till 4:30 in the morning. And in Otago, State Highway 90 from Tapanui to Waikoikoi, because of flooding, State Highway 90 is closed between Station Road and Koi Road. It's 17 minutes to 6. Our next news and weather is at 6 o'clock.
Thank you, Evie. Returning to our earlier story, the government's announced plans to end the postcode lottery for cataract surgery, introducing a consistent nationwide threshold to qualify for surgery. It says that will mean 3,500 more people will get the eye operation. Dr Vanessa Blair is president of the New Zealand Association of General Surgeons and joins us now. Kia ora.
Oh, kia ora, Lisa. Thank you for having us.
What do you make of this announcement from the government today?
Well, I think, you've got to, first of all, be positive. We've waited a long time to see progress like this since the advent of Te Whare Ora. And I want to acknowledge that. And I think I'm encouraged to see that they say it's kicking off a waitlist action plan. So I'm hoping this is just the beginning and that progress will be a lot faster than it has been.
So 3,500 more people will qualify for the surgery, according to the government. How do you anticipate that backlog would be cleared? Do we have the resources for that?
Well, I can't comment on what the ophthalmologists, I can't comment on their work capacity. That's not my place. I'm a general surgeon and I represent the Association of General Surgeons. But, this is, from what I can see, it's 3,500 operations, which I think will be probably $3,000 to $4,000 each. That's over $10 million of health expenditure. And I don't know. We're struggling to get capacity everywhere across the country at the moment. So I am a little bit disconcerted about where are they going to fit all of these operations. And then if this is a start, and if we do see fairness and transparency across other people that are waiting for surgeries, then I don't know where all this capacity is going to be found.
The Minister has mentioned a thing that she calls insourcing, and given that you're hopeful this is just a start and other waiting lists will be attacked in the same way, this insourcing, she says, would involve paying public surgeons and medical staff to work on their days off. She cited a Saturday to get through a list if they want to. We're told constantly that medical professionals are already exhausted.
I will be shocked if they will be able to find surgeons and anaesthetists and nursing staff who are prepared to work later in the evenings or on Saturdays to get through this number of operations. Forgive my cynicism, but every political season when there's an election coming, we see this type of political footballing, and it's usually the cataracts are first. and then second will be the hip and knee joints. And if you don't mind me saying, we all know that if you're going to be casting a vote, you need to be able to see the ballot paper and you need to be able to walk to the voting booth. So, I mean, this type of thing happens all the time, and I don't know where they're going to fit these surgeries in, because if we then move to the other areas that are not so commonly and easily spoken about, things like hemorrhoid surgery, incontinence surgery, prostate surgery, weight loss surgery, you know, I can't see where there is capacity in our current public hospital setting. And insourcing is we've seen a lot of inequities in insourcing. I know that around the country, surgeons and anaesthetists get paid different amounts at different times in different parts of the country, which that needs to stop. I mean, that is a different type of inequity. And I'm a little bit perplexed about how they intend to see this happen, because we see a variation often, and it's another source of unfairness to our membership and to the anaesthetists and anyone involved as well in doing this extra work.
You mentioned some other surgeries. What are the biggest wait lists for?
Well, we don't actually know. It's not easy for us to see, and this is another point I've raised before. Our membership, I really want to see more transparency. I mean, I think the New Zealand voters deserve to know how long the waiting lists are for each particular specialty and each particular surgery in the different parts of the country. And it's that type of transparency which will be very much welcomed. And that will lead to equity, because rural New Zealand, we know, and also Māori and Pacifica people do not get the same access to surgery. And so, you know, this type of action that they're doing, what we've seen today, we need follow-through with fairness and transparency for the whole country.
Thank you for your thoughts this evening. That is Dr. Vanessa Blair, who is the President of the New Zealand Association of General Surgeons. Cabinet Minister Kitty Allen is taking a 2-week break over Parliament's recess, after which the Prime Minister will meet with her to discuss allegations surrounding her treatment of staff. Ms Allen is facing extra scrutiny after Stuff last week reported claims from an anonymous senior public servant that the Minister had yelled and screamed at them. Kitty Allen has strongly denied the claims. Speaking at his regular post-cabinet media conference this afternoon, Chris Hipkins refused to comment on the accusations, saying that would wait until he had had a chance to discuss them with Ms Allen. He did say, however, that he expected all his ministers to treat officials with respect and courtesy.
I don't expect ministers to be absolutely perfect human beings. Everybody will have a bad day from time to time, particularly when they're under pressure. The question is, what do you then do about that? So if you exchanged words with someone, this happens in workplaces every day, what do you then do about that? And I expect ministers, again, to make sure that they're treating people with respect.
Mr Hipkins wouldn't be drawn on questions surrounding his confidence in Ms Allen, saying it was premature to make judgments. He described her as an exceptionally talented minister and said she deserved natural justice. 10 minutes away from 6, kia mau tōne mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. An investigation has been launched by Southern Football after a Wanaka footballer was allegedly racially abused in a match against Rosalind Wakari in Dunedin. Daniel Lorenzo was playing for Wanaka when his teammates say he was singled out by someone in the crowd. Jonty Dine has the story.
It was midway through the first half at Ellis Park in Dunedin when the derogatory name allegedly came from the crowd. Lorenzo did not hear the slur, but his teammates did, and several of them confronted the crowd, but this only led to one of them receiving a yellow card.
I'm the only Brazilian on my team, so the boys always helped me. Although I don't speak English very well, they're always patient with me. They always try to speak slowly for me to understand. They are all very supportive.
Originally from Sao Paulo, Lorenzo came to New Zealand with his family 9 months ago.
I never thought that it would ever happen to me on the field. I've always played ball. I played football my whole life. My life dream was dedicated to football, so I never thought I was going to have to deal with that. It's an awful thing, but I believe it will pass.
Video of the incident has been sent to New Zealand Football for review. Southern Football CEO Dougal McGowan said they have collected reports from witnesses from both sides.
Referees, witnesses, people who have been around both sides, both clubs. There's a lot of information to work through. There's videos and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, we've got a wee bit of work to do, but the team are not far off from completing that work now.
McGowan says it was disappointing to hear of the incident.
Listen, we've been talking about sideline behaviour and on-field behaviour for a long period of time. We are quite concerned about a number of different things that are happening on the field, off the field, and it's not just our sport, it's a variety of different sports. We're talking with other groups and they're finding the same things, and we're seeing it in general society as well. So, you know, what we want to make sure is that people are able to participate and do so freely without having any of this sort of stuff going on.
Lorenzo's mother, NIWA, is heartbroken.
You hear about it, hear about racism between people, hear about it a lot. But when it happens to us, it's horrible. I'm so hurt because he was doing what he loves the most. He has played football since he was a kid. It's his dream, his life. It's everything for him.
2 weeks ago, the All Whites abandoned their match against Qatar after one of the opposition allegedly made a racial slur toward defender Michael Boxall. And a Wellington Phoenix reserves player has been stood down after admitting to using homophobic language on the field. Finn Conchi has apologised for the comments and will face disciplinary action from Capital Football.
Jonty Dine reporting there. Diving temperatures are no deterrent to a group of Christchurch dippers who are taking a daily ocean plunge this month to raise money for charity. The Scarborough dippers have set themselves a challenge. Dubbed Wet July, regardless of temperature, rain or snow, they are going in to the sea, that is. Joining us now is founding member of the Scarborough dippers, Kerry Newton. Kerry, are you off your rocker?
Well, some would say so, but it's a lot of fun, I tell you.
How was this morning? I assume you went in.
Yes, well, actually, it was quite a pleasant surprise. Even though it was southerly, it was warmer in the water than out, and it was very calm. So, yes, it was easy today.
Estimated temperature, please?
It's still about 11 degrees, the water temperature. And about the coldest in the past it's gone down to is about 8 degrees. So, it's normally warmer in the water than out.
Apparently tomorrow it's going to be brass monkeys, right? So how do you warm up after you get out?
Oh, look, honestly, that's the fun part of it. We have hot water bottles. We have what you call a bucket of joy. So we bring buckets along and fill it with hot water and stand in that. And we have... Yeah, there's all sorts of things. It's quite amusing, really.
Is it just you and your two friends down there, Kerry, or how many people turn up?
No, look, honestly, I don't know how many were there today. I know on Saturday, the first day, I think we had 35. So, yes.
I don't mean to be indiscreet, but are you just wearing your bikini or your togs?
Yes.
No wetsuit or anything?
No, you can't have a wetsuit.
Blimey, so that's cheating, is it?
Yes, yeah. But we do, look, honestly, it's just to get there. It gets us through the month. We raise some money. Some people wear booties or, I wear a bathing cap and things like that. So it's really just, it started as a way to get through winter and raise some money. And, this is our 7th year.
Is it dip and dash? You just kind of plunge in and straight out?
No. No, we learned that you actually just take your time getting in, and we try and stay in. Well, we sort of thought, we'd try and stay in the minutes of the water temperature. So if it's the water temperature is 11, we try and stay in sort of 11 minutes. But really, there's no rules or whatever. We just do it how we feel at the time, and
Crikey,
and then have a coffee or something afterwards.
Very hardy individuals. What are you raising money for this year, please?
Well, so this year, because we try and do it community sort of orientated, so and it will depend how much we raise. Last year we actually raised 11,000, so we've sort of asked the community what is needed. So a defibrillator along the Esplanade. We've got some at both ends, but of course, obviously, people surfing and things like that. And we've got a new village green that's going to be up and running. So we thought maybe a community barbecue in there. a bike rack to the end of the coastal pathway are just a few of our options.
Sounds fantastic.
It will depend how much money we raise, and yeah.
You're setting the bar high, ambitious. Now, if there are people listening, Kerry, and they think, well, that sounds like a barrel of laughs, how do they join in?
Well, we're every day during the week, 7 a.m. at Scarborough, outside Scarborough Fair Cafe. And at the weekends, we are there, but it may vary in times. But we've got a Facebook page, Scarborough Dippers, and we always update that. And like, there's several people that may not be able to make 7 a.m. And so, they might join up at another time, or some go over to Cass Bay. It's just really, how people can fit it into their day.
Thank you, Kerry, and good luck for tomorrow, where it's going to be as crisp as we would say. That is Kerry Newton, who's one of the founding member of Scarborough Dippers, and they get sponsorship, which is how they raise the money, and they're going in every single day this month in order to raise money for those community projects that she was talking about. 8 degrees, did she say, tomorrow? Oh, no, thank you. Some feedback and a PSA. We've had several reports from listeners that the RNZ signal is breaking up. Well, I just wanted to let you know our technicians are looking into it, so hopefully it'll be resolved shortly. Do bear with us. On the surgery postcode lottery announcement by the government today, Raywin says, all very well increasing the number of people eligible for operations, but isn't there major staff shortages? Good point, Raywin. And they are already overworked and doing extra shifts. I'm not sure that existing staff will be putting their hands up for even more underpaid overtime shifts. Another person has got in touch to say, you do know that the number of ophthalmologists allowed to work in this field are governed not by the Health Board, but by the Society of Ophthalmologists. They create a shortage of doctors in order to drive patients into private and more lucrative arrangements. That assertion from Martin. On the subject of Tipsy Tory, the Wellington Mayor, this person says, who among us has not made an embarrassing gaffe? Those few should be the only ones commenting. I would be angry if I had had a night like that, as staff commented to the media before I had had a chance to make good my error. And Shelley has got in touch to say, the mayor is the mayor 24 hours a day. I have sympathy with having a night out, but not the arrogant words spoken. How would we view this incident if it was a middle-aged man? Not good enough and worrying relationship with alcohol, reckons Shelley. Another person says, I think people, especially the media, should leave her, the Wellington Mayor Tory Whānau, alone. Nobody is perfect after all. That one in from Jeremy from Tawa in Wellington. Cricket, England's version of the underarm incident, says Stuart Gardner.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening. Paul Mārie, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. Health officials are looking into which kinds of elective surgery people can qualify for, regardless of where they live. The Health Minister has today announced a national threshold for cataract surgery to remove inconsistencies between regions. Under the old system, district health boards had different thresholds for who qualified. Aisha Verrill says the new model will be used in other areas, but officials need to consider the logistics first. She says the government needs to be able to deliver any extra operations it commits to. The Association of Optometrists says today's announcement is a step in the right direction for the sector. However, its president, Callum Milburn, says practices will need to be prepared.
We're going to all of a sudden we'll have a flood of patients who need to be assessed and prioritised, and so that can all be done in an optometry clinic, so we need to have that system really streamlined so the optometrist can save those specialist appointments from being needed to clog up the system.
Callum Milburn says the announcement shows there's good support for eye care professionals. The Prime Minister says Kiri Allen will take a break over Parliament's recess before meeting with him to discuss allegations she mistreated staff. The Justice Minister has been under scrutiny since Stuff last week reported an anonymous senior public servant's claim that she yelled and screamed at staff. Chris Hipkins says Ms Allen will take some time off during the 2-week recess.
Kitty had a rough couple of weeks, and I think it would be good for her to take some time off. She's indicated that she would like to take some time off. It's school holidays. a lot of people will take a bit of a break during this time, and I think that will be a good thing.
Chris Hipkins says he'll have a good catch-up with Kitty Allen when he returns from Europe next week. Efforts to hold Russia legally accountable for the war in Ukraine take a step forward today with the opening of a special tribunal in The Hague. Backed by the EU, the US and Ukraine itself, the tribunal has been set up specifically to deal with the crime of aggression. The BBC's Grant Ferret has the details.
Investigators in Ukraine have been gathering evidence to prove that Russia has committed war crimes since the full-scale invasion began in February last year. The ICC can't prosecute the crime of aggression, and the new centre in The Hague is designed to plug that gap. It'll coordinate the gathering of evidence, working alongside the ICC. The offence of aggression concerns those who plan and order the use of armed force against a sovereign country. In other words, it's aimed at political and military commanders, in this case President Putin and his generals.
The embattled consulting firm PwC Australia has named and sacked 8 senior partners linked to the use of confidential Treasury briefings. PwC says professional standards were breached. The ABC's Daniel Visser reports.
The scandal involved a senior partner using secret information about government plans to tax multinational companies, working out a way to get around them and selling the plan to those companies. Former CEO Tom Seymour, who has already stood down, is named on the list, along with other senior leaders, including the former Chief Risk Officer Sean Gregory. There are around 50 more names, noted in emails released by the Senate, who had contact with the confidential information but may not have known how it was obtained.
Questions are being raised as to whether youth justice facilities are working the way they're intended to. 8 young people who went onto the roof at the Korowai Manaaki Centre in South Auckland on Saturday have all come down. It's the second incident in just over a week. Young people also went onto the roof of a Canterbury facility. Clinical psychologist Dougal Sutherland says the system needs to be looked into.
It's an easy solution for society for them to be put away into essentially a secure facility, but whether or not that's best for those young people and ultimately us as a society once they get out, I think is a bigger question and probably needs a much more in-depth analysis.
The youths involved in the Korowai Manaaki incident are now in police custody. IHC wants more protection for disabled children in residential special schools. Enrolment in the 3 schools is bouncing back after years of decline, despite a UN recommendation that they be closed. IHC Inclusive Education Consultant Trish Grant says more children should get community-based support, but in the meantime, the government should place more controls on the schools.
Disabled children in Oranga Tamariki care, for example, have care standards that are in place. We think that would be a good idea for these schools, residential special schools, to have care standards and also accessible complaints mechanisms.
Trish Grant says the schools are attractive for families who aren't getting enough support from community-based options. And a recent legal change means homeless people can no longer be inadvertently fined for freedom camping. The Freedom Camping Act 2011 wasn't meant to target those experiencing homelessness, and the Ministry for Business, Innovation and Employment says that was made clear to councils through advice provided alongside the law. However, it says recent consultation has shown that guidance alone isn't enough. The Self-Contained Motor Vehicles Legislation Act, which came into effect last month, clarifies that the homeless are exempt from infringements for freedom camping. The law's effect on homeless people will be reviewed in 2 years. That's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. On 9 to noon tomorrow, how changes to retail and the rise of touchscreens are impacting the visually impaired. Are Kiwi businesses and their customers contributing to modern slavery? What do we really know about what's happening in our supply chains? Surviving True Crime, a survivor of a horrifying and well-publicised crime, has a new podcast about moving past trauma, and research reveals the age of your brain and body can appear many years younger or older than your actual chronological age. With me on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. From Northland to Manawatu, also Coromandel Peninsula and the Central High Country. Showers more frequent in the west, some heavy with thunderstorms possible there today. Showers becoming isolated overnight tonight. Gale west to southwesterlies easing tomorrow. Bay of Plenty and from Gisborne to Wairarapa, scattered showers. Some possibly heavy and thundery in Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, clearing tonight. Fine tomorrow. Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast and Wellington. Any remaining showers clearing and becoming fine this evening. For Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, isolated showers clearing early this evening and becoming fine everywhere. Bulla and Westland, showers north of Hokitika clearing tonight but returning tomorrow morning, mainly fine in the south. Otago, Southland and Fiordland. Showers, some heavy, becoming isolated tomorrow afternoon. Gale southwesterlies in exposed places. And for Kohu, Chatham Islands, showers, possibly heavy with thunderstorms tomorrow afternoon. It's 7 minutes past 6. Our next news headlines are at 6:30.
Nā mihi Evie, no mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Contactless payment methods like PayWave are fast becoming the norm at the counter, but for many the convenience of waving a card is outweighed by the extra charges, sometimes 4% on top of a bill. The Commerce Commission's starting to regulate the industry and has so far approached 12 organisations that may be surcharging too highly. But a banking expert says a solution to the costly problem may have been in New Zealand the whole time. Reporter Tom Taylor and cameraman Nick Monroe have the story.
These days, a cup of coffee could set you back anywhere from $2 to $7. But it's harder to judge the actual price when there's an extra charge tacked on at the last minute. These Mount Eden shoppers can see the impact on their bank statements.
Look, it's very little, but at the end of a week or a month it would add up quite considerably, you know, it'd probably be in the $20, $30 range. I mean, that's a few coffees for me or a couple of drinks out, so I prefer to spend my money that way.
I'll be resolved to save that money, and when the prompt comes up on the screen I'll look at it and go, no, I'm determined to go through the manual part of it.
Inserting a card and punching in a PIN to avoid surcharges is a matter of principle for some. But for others, COVID lockdowns and concerns about contact have made PayWave and PayPass part of the routine. Store manager at Mexicali, Cameron Wise, says customers' habits have changed.
People using regular credit debit cards, that's actually the least popular. I'd say it goes PayWave, cash, cards.
But Mexicali's a chain that absorbs the cost of its PayWave fees.
It feels more convenient to them. It feels like we're not taking something extra. Like they're paying for their food, and that's it.
Many smaller businesses with smaller margins don't have a choice but to pass the fees on. Across the road at the Stop and Save Superette, Devon Kumar charges 2.5% extra for tap-and-go purchases, meaning a $4 bottle of milk could actually cost $4.10. But he says none of that surcharge spills over into his bank account.
In the beginning, people who didn't know, they think we charge the money. But it's not us, it's the bank charges the money.
But the banks say they're not making any profit from the payments and are just passing on their costs. ANZ charges merchants a maximum 0.7% for contactless debit payments. Credit cards come with a higher fee, around 1.5%, while international credit cards come with an even higher fee of 2.5%. But most stores only have one terminal and therefore one surcharge to cover all of these forms of payment. The Commerce Commission says this combined surcharge should be a weighted average of all fees, so if most customers are using contactless debit rather than credit, the charge should be lower. But some of the surcharges in stores are more than 4%, well above even the highest merchant fees charged by banks. Regulation branch manager Nick Russ says in a lot of cases, even 2.5% is too high.
There's 2 or 3 things that could be happening if someone's charging 2.5%. They could happen to be using a payment provider that charges that high level of fee. We would encourage those merchants in those situations to shop around for a better deal. The merchant may believe that their fee is 2.5%, but due to not enough transparency from the provider, they might be overcharging for it inadvertently without realising, or they might be charging in excess of their costs.
As of November, the interchange fees that companies like Visa and MasterCard charge banks to use their networks have been capped at 0.2% for contactless debit and 0.8% for credit transactions. The Commerce Commission expects these limits to drive the overall merchant fees down. And if they go down, surcharges should follow. But so far, generally speaking, they haven't. Since November, the Commission's received 96 inquiries about excessive surcharges and has approached 12 merchants to set out their expectations. Nick Russ says it's rare for retailers to knowingly overcharge customers, and the Commission's taking an educative approach for now.
We've had some positive responses for a number of merchants that, as a result, have rethought their surcharging and resulted in it reducing.
But they've also got powers of enforcement, including hefty fines for businesses that continue to overcharge. Back on Mount Eden Road, Circus Cafe manager Nixon Shershin applies a surcharge of 2%, which he says is a rough average of all the fees he's charged. And for many people rushing to grab their coffee and get out the door, it's a price they're willing to pay.
80% of the customer, hey, I don't have time to do it. Some people pay with their Apple Watch. They're always on a run. They do it. I've also seen people doing, there's a surcharge. I'm not going to do it. I'll pay with a different card.
But David Cunningham, a former chief executive of the Cooperative Bank, says payment fees simply don't have to be this high.
We've gone from probably the most efficient payment system in the world with EFTPOS in New Zealand 20 years ago to one of the less efficient ones.
He says back in the 80s and 90s, when New Zealand introduced EFTPOS, the massive scale of the infrastructure ensured much lower fees for merchants. The move away from this domestic network towards the international Visa and MasterCard networks is where the higher fees came into play. But Mr Cunningham says we can look to our neighbours across the ditch for solutions. Merchants in Australia can opt into a practice called least cost routing, meaning contactless debit payments are automatically channelled through the cheapest network, which in many cases is EFTPOS.
The answer is to go back to EFTPOS network being the primary way payments are made in New Zealand.
The Commerce Commission says it's looking into a range of solutions, including potentially implementing further caps on merchant fees. And they want to remind customers that they should always have the choice to swipe or insert and avoid surcharges altogether.
If you were listening to that story on radio, you can check out the video version, which will be on our web page. A trip to the supermarket might seem like a shortcut to raised blood pressure with the cost of living crisis, but all jokes aside, in the future it could actually be a lifesaver. As part of a UK study, electrocardiograms or ECG sensors were installed in the handles of supermarket trolleys to screen adults for abnormal heart rhythms while they shopped. The trial at 4 Sainsbury's stores over 3 months screened more than 2,000 adults by getting them to hold the trolley handle for at least a minute. It then flagged people with irregular heart rhythms that could be put at risk of stroke, and they were sent for follow-ups. Professor Ian Jones of Liverpool John Moores University is one of the study authors, and he joins us now. Hi, Professor.
Good morning, or good evening to you.
Thank you. Hey, what did you find out in the results of this study?
The study had 2 main objectives. The first one was to see whether people would actually use the trolleys, because we weren't actually sure whether they would or not. So we of those that we asked to participate, 2/3 of people agreed to push the trolleys around, and so we were confident that that would lead to further studies. The second one was that we identified 59 people with atrial fibrillation. So if you have atrial fibrillation, that you are at greater risk of stroke, heart failure and cognitive decline. So of those 59, 20 were known to have atrial fibrillation, but actually there were 39 that were undiagnosed.
So you picked up 39 people who otherwise would not have known they had this potentially, well, it has potential for more serious conditions like a stroke.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So 39 people that were walking around with no knowledge that they had this abnormal rhythm, and they were at greater risk of these other illnesses.
And so what happened when you identified them? Do you flag them for follow-up, and what is that?
Yeah, so what we did was we identified them, we spoke to them, we then gave them a clinic appointment with my colleague, Professor Gregory Lipp, who is one of our local cardiologists. He saw them in clinic. When somebody has atrial fibrillation, we have to risk assess them. So some people are at greater risk and need, for example, if they're at greater risk of stroke, they have to have anticoagulants or blood thinners. Those that are at lower risk, we can just monitor. So the general practitioner, the family doctor, was aware of those at lower risk. Those at higher risk were given anticoagulants.
And what was the accuracy of the trolley sensors?
Yeah, so we looked at whether they were particularly effective at picking up atrial fibrillation, and also how many false positives we may get. So there were a number of problems with the sensors, in as much as the movement across the trolley handle were picking up a number of false positives. So we're not under any illusions that this is very early stages and that we need to improve the quality of the sensors. So for example, the sensor we used, which had been previously kite marked and was appropriate medical device, it requires 60 seconds of connection. The main guidelines suggest that you only actually need 30 seconds of connection. So we're now working with other companies to try and reduce that. That will obviously reduce the amount of muscle movement on the trolley. But we're confident that if we can eradicate the artifact or that muscle movement, then that will provide us with an even greater opportunity to identify atrial fibrillation.
So people were largely positive about participating. Did you go to a cross-section of supermarkets and a cross-section of population as such?
Yeah, we recruited anybody over the age of 18. We deliberately didn't focus on particular groups. We recruited anybody. And we actually targeted in because one of the things we traditionally see in traditional screening programs is that people who are the worried well, as we say, they would tend to go to a screening program, but those who are less likely to engage in healthcare initially are less likely to engage with health screening. So we want to introduce something where we would target people through their daily lives. So in effect, somebody would push the trolley around the store. They didn't need to make an appointment with a GP. And that allowed us to target pretty much anybody that was likely to be, that was over the age of 18. We particularly focused on areas of high social deprivation because we knew the yield would be likely to be higher in those areas. But overall, it was anybody over the age of 18.
Yeah, how much of a game changer do you think it is? Because normally, as you say, the expectation is that people will get off their backsides and come to a health service. They have busy lives, they have transport and access issues. So potentially, how much of a game changer is this? Because you're going to them now.
Absolutely. And we often use the word hard to reach, and I've tried to change the narrative to that they're not hard to reach, we are hard to access. So one of the things we're trying to do is a number of studies that we've got underway at the moment where we're trying to look at ways of bringing healthcare to the community in a way that doesn't detract them from their normal lives, because people are busy, they have complex lives, and so we're trying to take healthcare to them to ensure that they can actually be screened relatively quickly. What we did do is we focused on supermarkets that had on-site pharmacists, so that in the long term, that if somebody does have an abnormal reading, you have a pharmacist on site. So they're not waiting to be picked up by anybody in the future. They're not waiting. They're not worried about that they might have a stroke in the meantime. We had a pharmacist on site, and consequently, they were seen very quickly. They were given reassurance. They were told exactly what would happen. So we think that, because other people have asked us whether we'd be interested in sort of rolling this out to in much wider areas. What my concern would be is if we're going to do this, we need to provide access to healthcare professionals pretty quickly. Otherwise, people will just sit and worry for weeks on end while they're waiting to be seen by somebody.
Yeah, I can imagine it'd be pretty traumatising to feel that you potentially have an issue that could lead to a stroke while you're just minding your business perusing the cornflake aisle. In all seriousness.
No, absolutely. And that's why we wanted to ensure that whatever we did, they were followed up quickly. So they were seen on site by a pharmacist immediately. I then contacted them that evening once I'd reviewed the ECG, and the ECG was then followed up with Professor Lip, and they were given an appointment within the week to go and see him in clinic. So we wanted to ensure that there was no time delay and people were worried. We wanted to make sure that we were following people up very quickly.
Absolutely fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for your time. That is Professor Ian Jones. He's from Liverpool's John Moores University. Study they did was with the sensors in trolley handles that could pick up on people's unusual heart rhythms and identify whether they were at risk of stroke. What do you reckon? Would you be happy to do that while you're perusing the supermarket aisles? Get a health check. 6:20 and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. There are growing calls for the government to overhaul the way young people are cared for in youth justice facilities. A group of 8 young people made their way onto the roof of Kurawai Manaki Centre in South Auckland over the weekend. The standoff was eventually resolved late last night. It's the second incident in just over a week after 5 young people went onto the roof of a Canterbury facility. Delphine Herbert has the story.
There are 5 youth justice residences in New Zealand that can hold up to a total of 155 young people. Rangatahi advocate and youth worker Aaron Hendry says there are major flaws in the system.
It just speaks to me again of how unsuitable these services and these facilities are. When we see that sort of behaviour, we often see that young people don't feel supported or safe or cared for, and it's another example of us needing to look at how we do youth justice a lot better.
He says the majority of troubled youth have faced hardship and addressing their needs will help stop reoffending.
We've seen a huge increase in inequality and poverty over the last few years. We've seen young people pushed to the margins of society through really tough times, and we can respond to this and we can solve it. We just need to have the courage to change this conversation.
The Independent Children's Monitor agrees. It says it's waiting for the outcome of a report being done by the former Police Commissioner Mike Bush, which was prompted by allegations of sexual misconduct towards children in Oranga Tamariki residences. Chief Executive Aaron Jones says it will keep a close eye on how things are going.
This is evidence that things aren't working the way they should. We're certainly going to be interested in the recommendations that Mike Bush will make from his work, and then what we'll be doing is monitoring to see whether those recommendations are being implemented.
He says ensuring the youth get the right care and take responsibility for the actions is a balancing act.
There's probably always going to be a need for a secure facility for some young people. However, it's about balancing the need to both hold these young people to account for their actions, but taking every opportunity to provide a therapeutic environment.
Meanwhile, actors calling for the youth justice facilities to be managed by corrections. Leader David Seymour believes the move would ensure young people are held accountable. But clinical psychologist Dougal Sutherland does not agree.
And I think corrections taking over them, it puts that more into it's the individual's fault rather than the community or the wider systems. And I really think that would be a backward step for corrections to take over.
He says a different approach is needed.
Putting young people who behave in an antisocial manner together is often the best way of getting more of that behaviour from those people.
Oranga Tamariki says the youths involved in the Korowai Manaki incident over the weekend are off-site and in police custody.
To France now, and the French President Emmanuel Macron has initiated crisis talks following days of violent unrest after a teenager was shot dead by police in Paris. Authorities are hopeful the demonstrations are slowing down, but still tens of thousands of police officers are out in force to prevent a 6th night of riots. A police officer has been charged with voluntary homicide over the teen's death and is in custody. The ABC's Isabella Higgins reports from Paris.
Anger and unrest has gripped France. For days, tens of thousands of police have been deployed to fight late-night looting, arson and attacks. What started as peaceful protests calling for justice often turned to violence. The protest started after a 17-year-old of Algerian descent was shot dead by police at a traffic check. Nahil M's grandmother, who wanted to be known only as Nadia, has called for the riots to end.
I blame the police officer who killed my grandson. That's all I'm angry with. We have the police, and lucky for us that we have the police. And the people who are breaking things, I tell them stop it, stop it.
The teenager's death started a fierce debate about institutional racism and prejudice in the country. The local police union reject this, but the UN says France must examine its record. Assa Traoré has been an activist against police violence in France for years.
Since we are in a country that does not recognize racism, we act as if there is none. We pretend that it doesn't exist. So when someone dies, we justify the death of a person by saying that it is his fault.
Her 24-year-old brother died in police custody in 2016. She says this is a time for national reflection.
I feel as if what is happening is being minimized. If this is happening to Nahil, it is because we have let the others pass, and that is what we must denounce.
In a southern Paris suburb, attackers tried to set alight the home of a local mayor and fired rockets at his fleeing wife and children. One local resident, who wanted the ABC to use only his first name, Philippe, says he cannot recognise his own country.
The mayor had nothing to do with it. But like everyone else, young people have taken revenge. We don't know why. It's shocking.
The French government has vowed to continue their crackdown on disorder. Police prepared for a sixth night on duty, while President Emmanuel Macron met with his top ministers to devise a crisis plan. There's hope the violence is ending, but the mood in this country remains tense.
And back home, news just to hand. Waka Kotahi says due to severe wind gusts, speed limits and lane reductions are now in place on the Auckland Harbour Bridge. The Transport Agency says high-sided vehicles and motorcyclists should consider delaying their journey. The remains of 8 British fighter planes dating back to the Second World War have been found buried in a forest in Ukraine. The aircraft were sent to the Soviet Union by Britain after Nazi Germany invaded the country in 1941. They were part of a package of Allied military support for the USSR. The BBC's James Landau sent this report.
We've come to a forest in the middle of, well, nowhere. It's about 2 hours drive south of Kyiv. And we're walking through the undergrowth, down a little ravine, and there's a hole in the ground, and in the hole, a rusty structure.
Here you see the tailplane of Hurricane Mark II.
Yes, you heard that right. This is what's left of what was once a Hurricane fighter plane. One of 3,000 Britain gave the Soviet Union in 1941 after Nazi Germany invaded.
Sincere friendship and mutual respect mark the collaboration between British and Russian flyers operating over Soviet soil.
The Hurricane was the workhorse of the Battle of Britain, shooting down more enemy aircraft than a Spitfire. And according to Alex Stan, an aviation investigator helping with the dig, they were exactly what the Soviets needed.
Hurricane was a strong, easy-to-fly machine, stable as a gun platform, suitable for not experienced pilots, and a reliable aircraft.
This is physical evidence of a moment 80 years ago when Western powers were giving warplanes to people in Ukraine, as they are now, to defend this country against an invading army. They reckon there are now 8 Hurricanes buried here. Because what happened was that these aircraft were often chopped up, all the spare parts were taken out first, all the metal that could potentially be used, and then they were unceremoniously dumped in this ditch and then covered over. Why did the Soviets destroy perfectly good planes? That's because these Hurricanes might have been made in Britain, but they were paid for by the United States. And after the war, the Soviets did not want to pay the US back for any aircraft left intact, as was required by the Lend-Lease agreement. All of this has to be taken out by hand. We're just carrying this tailplane out of the ravine here. And you know what? It's a heavy piece of kit.
Okay, that's it from us this evening. Late News team will keep you updated throughout the night. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi Popo. Tomorrow from 5 a.m. First up is on Waiheke Island to hear about the fuss over ferries. It sounds like they've let Leonard Powell out of the office again. Well worth getting up early for to catch Lenny's story.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening, I'm Evie Ashton. Strong wind warnings are in place around Auckland's Harbour Bridge until 9 tonight, with gusts of 90 to 110 kilometres forecast. But the Employers and Manufacturers Association is fed up at the will it or won't it nature of lane closures and wants Waka Kotahi to reassess its risk threshold. The Prime Minister won't say if it was appropriate for a group of teen offenders to be given takeaways after a 30-hour standoff on the roof of a justice facility. Southern Football is investigating reports of a Brazilian player being racially abused at Saturday's Wanaka versus Roslyn Waikari match in Dunedin. And Gisborne residents face at least a year's wait for 8 bridges destroyed in Cyclone Gabrielle to be permanently rebuilt. Those other headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Pacific Waves bringing Kiribati back into the forum.
Diving into the big stories of the region.
They are an instrument of the Constitution of Fiji.
And shining a light on issues affecting Pacific peoples in Aotearoa and around the world.
Being able to go out into different places and areas that share special connections with our community was really special.
We tala noa to Pacific leaders, newsmakers, experts and commentators, and bring you up-to-date coverage from our dedicated RNZ Pacific team and talented correspondents on the ground in the region. Pacific Waves at 8:15 weeknights on RNZ National.
Hello again, ngā mihi, you're with me, Evie Ashton, through the next half hour, listening to Trending Now. You can text us on 2101 and tell us how you're doing, tell us how we're doing, tell us how everything's going. I'll be keeping an eye on Waka Kotahi's updates, and while we're talking about that, Lisa Owen updated you on Checkpoint to say that lanes were closed on Auckland's Harbour Bridge. Well, just to update that once again, all lanes are now open on the Auckland Harbour Bridge. Strong wind gusts may impact again today with further lane reductions possible. It's up and down like a you-know-what. I won't say it in case we get nasty texts ticking me off, and quite rightly too, for a symmetrical but out-of-date saying. Right, we begin the half hour with The Detail. In today's episode, the Detail team take a closer